Some boxes are filled with memories. Others are filled with answers that were never meant to be found. 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, I was sitting alone on the floor of her attic surrounded by 26 years of somebody else's memories. Dust floated through thin beams of afternoon sunlight that slipped between the old wooden rafters. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. For most of my life, Grandma Eleanor had filled every room with warmth. She baked cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. She remembered every birthday. She never let anyone leave her house hungry. Now all that remained were photographs, furniture, and boxes waiting to be sorted. My name is Olivia Bennett, and I thought I was cleaning out an attic. I had no idea I was opening the first page of a story that had been hidden for decades. I sat cross-legged beside a stack of old trunks and carefully opened another cardboard box. Most of the contents were exactly what I expected. Holiday decorations, recipe cards, handwritten notes, a collection of postcards from places my grandmother had visited years ago. Then I noticed something unusual tucked behind a folded blanket. A small wooden box. Unlike everything else in the attic, this box looked intentionally hidden. It was made of dark oak with brass hinges worn smooth by time. There was no label. No lock. Just years of dust covering the surface. Curiosity immediately replaced exhaustion. Slowly I lifted the lid. Inside were only 3 items. An old photograph, a sealed envelope, and a silver necklace wrapped in a piece of faded cloth. For several seconds I simply stared. The photograph drew my attention first. Carefully I picked it up. The image appeared to be at least 25 years old. A young woman stood near a lake beneath bright summer sunlight. She looked happy. Beside her stood a man wearing a dark suit. His face was partially obscured by the angle of the picture. Something about him felt strangely important even though I could not explain why. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in elegant handwriting were 3 simple words. Keep her safe. A chill moved through me. The message felt personal. Urgent. Almost like a warning. Who were you? I whispered to the woman in the photograph. There was no answer. Only silence. Next, I examined the envelope. My pulse quickened when I noticed there was no name written on the front. No date. No address. Nothing. The seal remained unbroken. I considered opening it, then stopped myself. Something about the envelope felt significant. As if opening it should happen at the right time rather than out of curiosity. Finally, I unfolded the cloth surrounding the necklace. A small silver locket rested in my palm. Beautiful. Delicate. Older than anything else inside the box. I pressed the release and opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of a little girl smiling at the camera. My breath caught unexpectedly. She looked familiar. Not because I recognized her. Because she resembled me. The same blonde hair. The same eyes. The same smile. I stared at the image for nearly a minute. Logic told me I was imagining similarities. Emotion told me otherwise. Suddenly my phone vibrated. The sound startled me. A message from my friend Madison appeared on the screen. Reminder. Charity fundraiser tomorrow night. Do not back out this time. I smiled despite myself. Madison had been trying to convince me to attend the event for weeks. Maybe it would be good to leave the house for an evening. To stop thinking about funerals and dusty attics. I glanced back toward the wooden box. Then at the photograph. Without really knowing why, I slipped the picture into my purse. Outside, the sun slowly dipped lower behind the trees. Inside the attic, the wooden box remained open beside me. Waiting. As though it had spent years hoping someone would finally look inside. The next evening, Manhattan glowed beneath a sky painted in shades of gold and deep blue. Traffic moved through the streets like rivers of light while people hurried between restaurants, theaters, and office buildings. Normally, I would have spent my Friday night at home with a book and a cup of tea. Instead, I stood outside one of the city's most prestigious hotels holding a small evening clutch and questioning every decision that had brought me there. Madison smiled beside me. You look great. You have said that 6 times. Because it is true. I laughed despite my nerves. The charity fundraiser occupied the hotel's grand ballroom and attracted some of the city's most influential people. Business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, the kind of guests whose names appeared in newspapers and financial magazines. the kind of people I usually only saw from a distance. We stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with warm golden light. Elegant floral arrangements decorated every table. Soft music drifted through the air while waiters carried silver trays between clusters of guests engaged in conversation. Everything felt polished. Expensive. Perfect. See, Madison said. You are already surviving. Barely. She rolled her eyes and disappeared toward a group of colleagues, leaving me alone beside one of the display tables showcasing items available for auction. For a while, the evening remained pleasantly ordinary. I spoke with a few donors, admired several pieces of artwork, accepted more sparkling water than I intended to drink. Gradually, I relaxed. Then I felt the photograph inside my purse. Throughout the day, I had considered leaving it at home. Something stopped me. Now, standing beneath the ballroom lights, I pulled it out again. The image still raised questions. The young woman by the lake. The mysterious man. The handwritten message. Keep her safe. I studied the photograph carefully. Maybe someone here would recognize the location. Maybe the lake. Maybe the people. It was a foolish thought, but curiosity continued growing. Interesting photograph. The voice came from behind me. I turned and found an older woman studying the picture. It belonged to my grandmother, I explained. I found it yesterday. She adjusted her glasses. The lake looks familiar. Hope immediately stirred. Really? Perhaps. She leaned closer. I cannot quite place it. Before I could ask another question, movement near the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. A subtle shift moved through the room, the kind that happens when someone important arrives. I followed the crowd's gaze. A tall man entered surrounded by several associates. Dark suit, calm expression, effortless authority. Even if nobody had spoken his name, his presence would have commanded attention. Luca Moretti. I recognized him immediately from local news coverage and charity events. People called him many things. Businessman. Investor. Power broker. Rumors attached additional titles depending on who was telling the story. Whatever the truth was, everyone in the room seemed aware of him. He greeted several guests before moving deeper into the ballroom. I returned my attention to the photograph. A moment later, someone accidentally brushed my shoulder while passing. The picture slipped from my hand. Sorry. The stranger continued walking. The photograph floated toward the floor. Before I could catch it, another hand reached down first. Long fingers lifted the image carefully. You dropped this. I looked up. Luca Moretti stood directly in front of me. For a second, everything felt normal. Then his eyes moved to the photograph. The change was immediate. Color drained from his face. His expression froze completely. The room continued moving around us, but Luca seemed unable to look away. His grip tightened slightly on the edge of the picture. Silence stretched between us. Then he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. That is impossible. For several seconds neither of us moved. The ballroom noise seemed to fade into the background while Luca Moretti stared at the photograph as though he had just seen something impossible. Around us, guests continued talking, glasses continued clinking, and music continued playing. Yet none of it seemed to reach him. His eyes remained fixed on the image. Mr. Moretti? I finally said. He blinked once. Slowly, as though returning from somewhere far away. Then he looked at me for the first time. Really looked at me. Not the polite glance people exchange at social events. Something deeper. Something searching. Where did you get this photograph? His voice remained calm, but I sensed tension beneath it. I found it yesterday. Where? In my grandmother's attic. The answer only seemed to deepen his disbelief. He lowered his gaze back toward the picture. His thumb brushed the edge of the faded photograph. A small movement. Yet somehow it felt personal. Familiar. That is not possible, he whispered again. Curiosity immediately replaced any nervousness I felt. Do you know the people in the photograph? Luca did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the image for several more seconds before carefully handing it back to me. May I ask your name? Olivia Bennett. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or confusion. Bennett. He repeated the surname quietly. Then he glanced toward one of his associates waiting nearby. The man seemed prepared to interrupt but wisely remained where he was. "Miss Bennett," Luca said, "would you be willing to have a conversation with me?" Under normal circumstances, I probably would have refused. Powerful strangers asking questions about mysterious photographs generally sounded like the beginning of a bad decision. Yet nothing about this evening felt normal anymore. "About the picture?" "Yes." His answer came immediately. "And perhaps about your grandmother." My pulse quickened. "You knew my grandmother?" For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. "I am not sure." That answer surprised me. It was honest. Unexpectedly honest. Before I could ask another question, one of the event organizers approached Luca. "Mr. Moretti, the board members are ready for the presentation." The organizer looked slightly nervous. Luca glanced toward the stage. Then back at me. Then toward the photograph. The decision appeared effortless. "Tell them I will not be attending." The organizer looked stunned. "The presentation begins in 5 minutes. Then they should begin without me." The man stood frozen for a moment before walking away. I stared. "You are skipping your own presentation?" A faint smile touched Luca's face. "Some things are more important than presentations." Those words should not have affected me. Yet somehow they did. 20 minutes later, we sat in a quiet private lounge overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan glittering beneath the night sky. The noise of the fundraiser felt distant now. Luca placed a glass of water in front of me before taking a seat across from me. The photograph rested between us on the table. "I need to show you something." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a worn leather wallet. Carefully, he opened it. Then he slid an old photograph across the table. My breath caught instantly. The same young woman appeared in his picture. The same lake. The same summer sunlight. The same smile. Only this time she stood alone. "Who is she?" I whispered. Luca looked at the image for a long moment. When he finally answered, his voice had changed completely. Softer. More personal. "Her name was Isabella Moretti." I looked up. "Moretti." He nodded slowly. "She was my aunt." Silence filled the room. My eyes moved between the two photographs. The similarities were undeniable. 2 pictures. Same woman. Same location. 2 completely different families connected by a mystery neither of us understood. Then Luca said something that made my heart stop for a moment. "Olivia, my family has been searching for answers about this photograph for 25 years. The city outside the windows seemed impossibly small compared to the realization sitting between us. 25 years. I stared at the 2 photographs spread across the table while Luca's words echoed in my mind. His family had been searching for answers connected to this image for 25 years. The number itself felt unreal. Longer than I had been alive. "Why?" I asked quietly. Luca leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the photograph of Isabella Moretti. For the first time since we met, he looked less like one of the most powerful men in New York, and more like someone carrying the weight of an unfinished story. "Because she disappeared." My breath caught. "Disappeared." He nodded. Not in the way people usually imagine. There was no crime headline. No national news story. Just confusion. Questions. Then silence. I looked back at the smiling young woman in the photograph. It was difficult to connect her warm expression with something so mysterious. "What happened?" Luca folded his hands together. "That is exactly what nobody ever discovered." The room fell quiet again. Below us, thousands of lights stretched across Manhattan. Lives continued. Cars moved. Ferries crossed the river. Yet somehow everything felt suspended around this single conversation. "And my grandmother?" I finally asked. "How does she fit into any of this?" Luca's expression shifted slightly. "That is what I need to find out." He reached into a leather portfolio resting beside his chair and removed several photocopied documents. Old records. Notes. Photographs. Carefully, he placed them on the table. 3 years ago, I opened part of my family's private archive. My eyes moved across the papers. Most appeared decades old. Some contained handwritten notes. Others looked like copies of official records. My father spent years collecting information about Isabella, Luca continued. He believed there was something important hidden in the years before she disappeared. He slid one document toward me. A black and white photograph. My pulse immediately quickened. Standing beside Isabella was a woman I recognized instantly. That is my grandmother.
Luca nodded slowly.
Eleanor Bennett. I stared at the image. My grandmother looked much younger, perhaps in her 20s. She and Isabella stood together beside the same lake visible in the photographs from the wooden box. Both were smiling. Both looked happy. Friends. Close friends. I do not understand. Neither do I.
Luca exhaled quietly.
Until tonight, I had never seen a connection between Isabella and your family. I studied the photograph more closely. Then something caught my attention. A date written across the bottom corner. June 14th. 26 years ago. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. That is impossible. Luca immediately looked up. What? I pointed toward the date. I was born 26 years ago. Neither of us spoke. The significance settled slowly between us. Isabella. My grandmother. The lake. The timing. Too many coincidences beginning to overlap. Luca reached for another document. This one appeared to be a page from an old journal. The paper had yellowed with age. A single paragraph was highlighted. He handed it to me. I read the words carefully. Eleanor promised she would protect her. If anything happens, she knows what to do. My heart immediately began racing. Protect who? The entry never said. There was no name. No explanation. Only that sentence. I looked up.
Luca.
His eyes met mine. Yes. I held up the journal page. I think my grandmother knew exactly what happened. The expression on his face told me he had just reached the same conclusion. Then his phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. The color drained from his face again. Slowly, he turned the phone toward me. Displayed on the screen was a scanned document that one of his investigators had just uncovered. Across the top, written in faded ink, were 4 words that changed everything. Eleanor Bennett private letter. Some letters answer questions. Others create even bigger ones. I stared at Luca's phone while my heartbeat seemed to echo inside the quiet lounge. Eleanor Bennett private letter. The words looked ordinary enough. Yet somehow they felt heavier than every photograph and document we had uncovered that night. Luca opened the file carefully. The scanned image appeared on the screen. The paper was old, folded many times. Time had faded parts of the ink, but the handwriting remained recognizable. My grandmother's handwriting. I knew it instantly from birthday cards, holiday notes, and recipes she had left behind over the years. Suddenly she no longer felt like the grandmother who baked cinnamon rolls and watered flowers every morning. She felt like someone carrying a secret. Luca turned the screen toward me. Are you ready? I was not, but I nodded anyway. The first lines appeared beneath the date. Dear Isabella, if you are reading this, then everything worked the way we hoped. My breath caught immediately. The sentence felt wrong.
Impossible.
Isabella had disappeared. Everyone believed that. Yet my grandmother had written directly to her. I continued reading. I will keep my promise. She will be safe. Nobody will know where she is until the time is right. My pulse quickened. She. The same mysterious word from the journal entry. The same unnamed person being protected. Luca leaned forward slightly. Neither of us spoke. Every answer seemed buried inside the next sentence. The letter continued. I wish things had been different. I wish you could stay. But you were right. Some truths would place her in danger. If anyone ever asks, I will tell them nothing. I stared at the words. My grandmother had known something. Isabella had known something. Both women had apparently agreed to hide a child. The realization sent a chill through me. Who was she talking about? I whispered. Luca shook his head. I do not know. Yet his expression suggested he was beginning to suspect. So was I. We continued reading. Years may pass before she learns the truth. If that day ever comes, give her the photograph. She deserves to know where she came from. I immediately thought about the picture from the wooden box. The photograph. The one my grandmother had hidden all those years. Suddenly it no longer felt like a keepsake. It felt like evidence. The photograph was meant for someone, I said quietly.
Luca nodded.
Apparently. My eyes returned to the letter. Near the bottom, the handwriting became shakier, more emotional. If I am no longer here when she discovers everything, tell her that I loved her as my own. Tell her that protecting her was never a burden. It was the greatest privilege of my life. Tears blurred my vision. For a moment I could not continue reading. The words felt too personal, too familiar. They sounded exactly like the woman who had raised me. The woman who attended every school play, every birthday, every important moment. Luca remained silent while I gathered myself. Finally I reached the final paragraph. Beneath it was a location written separately from the rest of the letter. A place. An address. Not in New York City. Not near Manhattan. Somewhere several hours north. My eyes narrowed. What is this? Luca immediately looked closer. Recognition flashed across his face. I know that address. I looked up. You do. He nodded slowly. My family owns property less than 5 miles from there. The room suddenly felt smaller. Another coincidence. Another connection. Another piece of a puzzle neither of us fully understood. Then I noticed one final line written beneath the address. A sentence so short it almost seemed unimportant. Yet it changed everything. If she ever finds this letter, take her to the lake. I stared at the words. Then at Luca. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he broke the silence. Olivia. Yes. His voice lowered slightly. I think your grandmother left us directions. The next morning arrived with the kind of quiet that usually follows a storm. Not a storm of weather but a storm of questions. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph, the letter, and my grandmother's familiar handwriting. By sunrise, one thought had settled firmly in my mind. I needed to know the truth. The address from the letter led north, far beyond the city skyline and the endless rhythm of Manhattan traffic. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting beside Luca in a black sedan moving along a highway lined with autumn trees. Golden leaves drifted across the road whenever the wind picked up. The sky was clear, bright, beautiful. It felt strange that a day carrying so much uncertainty could look so peaceful. Neither of us spoke much during the first hour. Occasionally I glanced at the envelope resting in my lap. Inside were copies of the photograph and the letter. The originals remained safely stored at Luca's office. Somehow the papers felt heavier than they should. You are nervous. Luca's voice broke the silence. I looked out the window. Is it that obvious? A faint smile appeared on his face. Only because I am too. That surprised me. You. He nodded. My family spent 25 years chasing pieces of this story. His eyes remained focused on the road ahead. I never expected to be this close to finding answers. I understood exactly what he meant. We were no longer dealing with theories. We had names, letters, locations, promises. The mystery was becoming real. 2 hours later the city had completely disappeared behind us. The landscape transformed into rolling hills, quiet roads, and small lakes reflecting the afternoon sun. Eventually Luca turned onto a narrow road surrounded by tall pines. The address led us deeper into the countryside. My pulse quickened with every mile. Finally the trees opened. A lake appeared. I recognized it immediately. Not because I had ever been there. Because I had seen it in the photograph. The same shoreline. The same curve of water. The same distant hills. For a moment I could not breathe. This is it.
Luca nodded quietly.
We stepped out of the car. The air smelled like pine needles and fresh water. The lake stretched before us, calm and almost perfectly still. Nearby stood an old wooden boathouse weathered by time. Everything felt frozen, preserved, as though the years had passed around it instead of through it. I slowly approached the shoreline. Memories did not suddenly return. There was no dramatic revelation. Yet something about the place felt familiar in a way I could not explain. Then Luca stopped walking. Olivia. I turned. He was staring toward the boathouse. Following his gaze, I noticed a woman standing near the entrance. Elderly. Silver-haired. Perhaps in her late 70s. She held a small gardening basket in one hand. For several seconds she simply stared at me. Then the basket slipped from her fingers. Vegetables rolled across the ground. Tears immediately filled her eyes. "No," she whispered. "It cannot be." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The woman slowly stepped forward. Her hands trembled visibly. "Eleanor always said this day would come." I froze. "You knew my grandmother?" The elderly woman nodded. "For more than 50 years. Luca remained silent beside me. The woman looked directly into my eyes. Not with curiosity, not with confusion, with recognition, as if she already knew exactly who I was. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Olivia." Her voice broke. "You have your mother's eyes." The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. "You have your mother's eyes." The sentence echoed through me with a force I could not explain. For 26 years, I had never heard anyone speak about my mother as though they actually knew her. Not a photograph. Not a record. Not a theory. A real person. Someone standing in front of me who had looked into her eyes and remembered them decades later. The elderly woman wiped tears from her cheeks and slowly approached. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I just never thought I would live long enough to see this day." Luca stood quietly beside me, allowing the moment to unfold. The lake behind us shimmered beneath the afternoon sun while a gentle breeze moved through the trees. Everything felt impossibly calm for a moment that was changing my entire life. "Who are you?" I finally asked. "My name is Margaret Hale." Her voice trembled slightly. "I was Isabella's closest friend." My breath caught. Isabella. The woman from the photograph. Luca's aunt. The woman connected to my grandmother's secret. Margaret gestured toward the small cottage beside the boathouse. "Please come inside." The cottage felt warm and lived in despite its age. Family photographs covered the walls. Books filled old wooden shelves. The scent of coffee and pine lingered in the air. It reminded me of my grandmother's house. Comfortable. Familiar. Safe. Margaret led us into a sitting room overlooking the lake. For several moments she simply stared at me. Not rudely. Not awkwardly. The way someone looks at a memory they thought they had lost forever. Finally she reached toward a nearby cabinet and removed an old photo album. My pulse immediately quickened. Carefully she opened it. The first page contained several photographs of Isabella. Younger. Smiling. Standing beside the lake. Then Margaret turned another page. My breath stopped. There was a photograph of Isabella holding a little girl. Blonde hair. Bright eyes. No older than 2 years old. "Who is that?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. Margaret looked at me gently. "You." The room fell silent. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I stared at the photograph. The child did resemble me. Not just slightly. Completely. The same smile. The same eyes. The same face I saw in childhood photographs from my own home. "No," the word escaped before I could stop it. "That cannot be me." Yet deep down part of me already knew. Margaret slowly nodded. "Your grandmother brought you here many times when you were little." Tears filled her eyes again. "You used to run along the shoreline collecting stones." I could not remember any of it. Not a single moment. Yet hearing her describe it felt strangely familiar. Like hearing a forgotten song. Luca remained. Completely still. I could sense him processing everything just as intensely as I was. Margaret turned another page in the album. A photograph slipped loose and landed gently on the table. My eyes immediately moved toward it. The image showed Isabella standing beside my grandmother Eleanor. Between them stood a man I had never seen before. Tall. Dark-haired. Wearing a suit. On the back of the photograph someone had written a date and a name. Luca picked it up first. The moment he read the handwriting, his expression changed completely. "That is impossible." I looked at him. "What?" He stared at the photograph. Then at me. Then back at the photograph again. "Olivia." His voice had become unusually quiet. "The man standing beside your grandmother and Isabella was my father." The photograph remained on the table between us like a door that had suddenly opened into the past. Luca's father. The words refused to settle in my mind. I looked down at the image again. My grandmother Eleanor. Isabella Moretti. And the man Luca had just identified as his father. all standing together beside the lake nearly 3 decades ago. Smiling. Comfortable. Connected. You are sure? I asked. Luca nodded without hesitation. Absolutely. His gaze remained fixed on the photograph. That picture was taken long before I was born, but I have seen enough family photographs to recognize him immediately. Margaret lowered herself into a nearby chair. She looked exhausted, as though years of silence were finally catching up with her. I wondered when someone would discover that photograph. My eyes moved toward her. You knew who he was? She nodded slowly. Everyone around the lake knew who he was. The room fell quiet again. Outside the window, sunlight reflected across the water while leaves drifted through the autumn air. The peaceful scenery felt strangely disconnected from the storm of emotions building inside me. Then tell us, Luca said gently. Please. Margaret looked toward the lake for several seconds before answering. Your father and Isabella were very close.
Luca listened carefully.
Brother and sister. More than that, Margaret replied softly. They trusted each other. Completely. Something about her tone suggested there was more. Much more. My pulse quickened. Margaret stood and walked toward an old bookshelf near the fireplace. From the highest shelf she removed a small wooden frame covered in dust. She carried it back carefully and placed it on the table. The photograph inside showed Isabella sitting on the cottage porch holding a toddler. My breath caught instantly. It was the same little girl from the photo album. The same child Margaret claimed was me. But this image revealed something different. Around the toddler's neck hung a small silver locket. My locket. The one I had found inside my grandmother's wooden box. My hand instinctively moved toward the necklace hidden beneath my sweater. That is impossible, I whispered. Margaret's eyes softened. No, Olivia. She looked directly at me. That is why Eleanor kept it. Every sound in the room seemed to disappear. I slowly removed the locket and placed it beside the photograph. The match was exact. Same design. Same engraving. Same delicate chain. Luca stared at the necklace in disbelief. My God. Margaret nodded. Isabella never took that locket off the child. Child. Not your child. Not someone. The child. As if there had only ever been one. I looked at the photograph again. Then at the necklace. Then at Margaret. Who was I? The question escaped before I could stop it. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. You were loved. Her answer only deepened the ache in my chest. That is not what I asked. She nodded sadly. I know. Silence stretched between us. Finally she opened a drawer in the side table beside her chair and removed a sealed envelope. The paper looked old. Very old. My heart immediately began racing. Across the front was written a single name. Olivia. My breath caught. Luca leaned forward. What is that? Margaret carefully ran her fingers across the envelope. The last thing Isabella left behind before she disappeared. The room seemed to shrink around us. 25 years of questions. 25 years of secrets. And now a letter addressed directly to me. Margaret placed the envelope in my hands. The paper trembled slightly beneath my fingers. Eleanor asked me to keep it safe until the right day arrived. I stared at the handwriting. My name. Written decades before I had ever opened that attic box. Decades before I knew any of these people existed. Then I noticed something else. Beneath my name, written in smaller letters, was a sentence that made my heart stop completely. Open this only after you learn who your father is. For a long moment nobody moved. The envelope rested in my hands while the final sentence echoed through the room. Open this only after you learn who your father is. The words felt less like a message and more like a doorway waiting to be opened. Outside, the lake reflected the late afternoon sun in shimmering ribbons of gold. Inside the cottage, decades of secrets seemed to gather around a single piece of paper. Margaret watched me carefully. Luca remained silent beside me. Neither of them tried to rush the moment. Slowly I looked up. Do we know who my father is? Margaret nodded. Tears filled her eyes before she spoke. Yes. My heart pounded. Then tell me. She folded her hands together. Your father was not the mystery everyone spent years trying to solve. The answer surprised me. What does that mean? Margaret glanced toward Luca, then back toward me. The secret was never about who your father was. Her voice softened. It was about protecting you until the day you were old enough to understand.
Ister daher.
Protecting me from what? Margaret exhaled slowly. From grief. From loss. From carrying a story before you were ready. The room became silent again. Then she finally answered the question that had followed me throughout the entire journey. Your father was Daniel Hart. The name meant nothing to me. Yet something in Margaret's expression told me it mattered. Who was he?
Luca spoke quietly.
A close friend of my father and Isabella. Margaret nodded. A good man. She smiled sadly. He passed away shortly before you were born. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Another person I would never meet. Another piece of a life that existed before my memories began. And my mother? My voice barely rose above a whisper. Margaret's eyes immediately softened. Your mother was Isabella. The words settled over me gently, not like a shock, like a truth that had been waiting patiently all along. Isabella, the woman in the photograph, the woman holding the little girl, the woman who left behind letters, promises, and hope. Slowly, I looked back down at the envelope. This time I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Isabella's. My hands trembled as I began reading. Olivia, if you are reading this, then Eleanor kept her promise. The tears came immediately. I continued reading. I do not know what kind of woman you will become. I do not know where life will take you. But I know this. You were loved before your first breath. You were loved every day after it. And you will be loved long after I am gone. My vision blurred. Every word felt like a hand reaching across decades. I read on. Eleanor was never meant to replace me. She was meant to give you the life I could not. If you are standing by this lake someday, thank her for me. She gave both of us a gift. She gave you a future. Tears rolled freely down my cheeks now. The final paragraph waited near the bottom. Do not spend your life searching for what was lost. Spend it cherishing what remained. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is every person who chooses to love you when they do not have to. I lowered the letter slowly. The cottage was quiet, peaceful, complete. For the first time since opening that wooden box in my grandmother's attic, I felt something I had not expected to find. Not answers. Not certainty. Peace. We stepped outside as the sun began disappearing beyond the trees. The lake glowed beneath the fading light. Luca stood beside me while autumn leaves drifted across the shoreline. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, he looked toward the water and smiled. Your grandmother kept a promise for 26 years. I looked down at the photograph, the locket, and the letter resting in my hands. Then toward the cottage behind us. And because of that, I said softly, I finally know where I come from. The wind moved gently through the trees. The lake remained calm. And somewhere between the memories that had been hidden and the future waiting ahead, I realized something simple. The old photograph had never been protecting a secret. It had been protecting a home until the day I was ready to find it.